Hi, we're going to continue talking about some of the things that make some people more popular than others. We've talked about social behaviors, we've talked about attractiveness. Now we're going to go on to a new topic, and that is what's the relationship between intelligence and popularity? And just as a spoiler alert here, this is going to be a very sad story about nerds, because what you'll see is that the way that intelligence is related to popularity changes a whole lot between childhood and adolescence. So let's talk a little bit about that now. It's probably no surprise that among very young children, we see that the more intelligent kids are, the more popular they are. In fact, the kids who are the least popular, in other words, those that are rejected, tend to have the lowest levels of IQ and also the lowest levels of school achievement, particularly those who are rejected and also aggressive. But a lot of research has been conducted to try and understand why might that be. And specifically, people have looked for what the mediator is. So let me just tell you a little bit about what a mediator is in case you're unfamiliar with that term. We might see that there's a predictor that helps us to understand a specific outcome. But it might be that there's a factor that explains that. So it's not that kids know what each other's IQ is, and that's how come they pick some to be more popular. There's some reason IQ must affect something, a mediator, and that mediator is what affects popularity. So for instance, we often talk with kids in class about the importance of taking their own notes and their own words. That is a predictor of getting better grades when you're studying for something. But the reason why, the mediator, is that taking notes in your own words helps you process the material cognitively at a deeper level. And when you process material differently, it makes you get better grades in that class. So the mediator here is the way that we process material. Now let's apply that to popularity and intelligence. Why is it that among young children, the most intelligent kids are the ones that are most popular? In other words, they're very, very well liked. Well, actually, research has suggested there are three reasons. One is those that are very intelligent seem to have good social problem-solving skills. And what I mean by that is that when they have a time that they're feeling upset or frustrated or they're confused about something, they're very good about not being aggressive. They can think about the appropriate ways to involve others, help them to settle things, develop good leadership skills, think about creative solutions. And that leads them to be really admired by their peers and become leaders. But we also see that there is a way in which many school teachers tend to show a preference towards those that are the most intelligent and those that are the highest academic achieving. And when you're really little, you really do whatever the teacher says. So if you see that the teacher really prefers the kids that are smart, then you start to prefer the kids that are smart. And you would really admire the ones that the teacher always points out as being seemingly their favorite. The one who's always in charge, the one that gets special roles in the classroom. And that also might be one of the reasons why we see that at young ages, intelligence is related to being really popular. Unfortunately, things change dramatically as kids get older. And the reason why is because there's a natural development in what kinds of values we really subscribe to as we get older. And you might remember a long time ago in one of the very earliest videos, we talked about some of this being mediated by changes in the brain, the ways that our brain makes us more interested in aligning with our peers. Well, specifically, as we were just talking about, at young ages, kids really look up to adults. They want to do everything their parents are doing. They copy what their parents are doing. Their favorite things are what their adults' favorite things are. They really are trying so hard to be just like their moms and dads and teachers. And that is totally normal at that age. But because of those brain changes, we see that by adolescence, parents are uncool, no one that you want to hang out with, and certainly the best way to make something uncool is to have parents like it. That immediately will make it something that adolescents do not want to be affiliated with at all anymore. And that's why we see in adolescence this huge shift on the pendulum towards being interested in peer values. Of course, we see that change a little bit as people get a little bit older. So when kids get into college and adulthood, they tend to find a middle place on this continuum. They are interested in doing things just like their parents, but they're also interested in valuing what their peers do. And as people have their first children, we see that pendulum shift even a little bit more towards parent values because suddenly they need to do what it is that they learned about when they were growing up, and that means sometimes adopting some of what their parents thought was important. And that pendulum is very, very normal. Well, what happens, though, is that we see that that ends up changing how intelligence is viewed in the peer world. At first, intelligence is something that is really important, and it's what teachers value, what your parents value. It is something that starts on that left end of the continuum. And because kids want to do what their parents value, they see intelligence and school achievement, something that signals you're doing what adults want you to do, as being great and cool and popular. But when you're an adolescent and you're doing things that represent good grades, behaving in school, and intelligence, well, that's what adults want you to do. And that's the opposite of what is cool in adolescence. You're supposed to be doing the exact opposite of what adults want you to do. And for that reason, there's a change. But sometimes the really intelligent kids still end up being popular anyway. How do they do that? Well, there's a really interesting study that was done by Jana Juvonen, a wonderful researcher at UCLA in California. And she did an experiment where she asked kids to rate how much that they think teachers would really value kids who put a lot of effort who had examples of a lot of effort or a lot of ability on a fictional task. She also asked kids to talk about how much they would find kids popular, varying how much effort or ability they spent on a task. So, in other words, there were 4 different vignettes that she read to kids. And those vignettes varied on those who were high or low on effort. Kids that she portrayed as saying they tried really, really hard to get good grades, or they didn't really try very much at all. She also varied whether these kids were generally very smart or they were not very smart. So in other words, it was a 2x2 design, and there were 4 vignettes, those with high effort and high ability, those with low effort and low ability, and those with 1 of each. Well, then what she did was she said, imagine that that child had a success experience. Let's say they did really well on a test. How would teachers feel about them? And she asked this to kids of varying ages. And what she found was kids thought that teachers, regardless of the kid's age, would really, really like the students who were really smart and who tried really hard. So in other words, they had high ability and high effort. They also thought that teachers would really like it, no matter what the age of the kid, if the kid tried really hard on this task, regardless of whether that child was smart or not. That's pretty much expected. But what was really interesting is what you can see on the right-hand side of this graphic, which is that depending on the age, they thought that kids would consider the popular kid to be the one that was really trying hard among kids that were young, and the kids that were not trying hard among the kids that were old. In other words, what they found was that as kids got older, they started to penalize the smart kids who seemed to be really trying to get good grades. It was okay to be smart. It's not okay to make it seem like you care about grades and you're trying to get good grades. As your effort goes up, your popularity goes down in adolescence, even though that exact same thing was being rewarded among younger children. It has to do with this change in values and the fact that some kids don't realize that they have to start adopting the peer values, at least outwardly, if they want to be popular. If they seem too much like a goody two-shoes doing what adults want them to do, then they're branded a geek and a nerd, and they start going down in popularity dramatically. We actually did a really interesting study with my own graduate school advisor, Annette LaGreca, where we asked kids in high school to tell us whether they were in the groups of kids who were known for being really smart, like the brains, if they were in the groups that were known to be the populars, if they were the ones that were more athletic, like the jocks, or if they were the ones that got in trouble a lot, maybe even took drugs, the burnouts. If you've ever watched The Breakfast Club, that's what we were interested in looking at, was which kids fell into which different groups. But while we asked them that information in adolescence, my advisor had data on these exact same kids when they were in elementary school. So this is called a follow-back design. We were able to look at the kids in high school and then look backwards and say, these kids who ended up being a jock or ended up being a brain, what did they look like when they were young kids, and how did their trajectory of functioning differ over time? Well, here again is the sad story for the nerds. What you can see here was that when it comes to feeling good about oneself, people generally tended to have self-esteem from childhood to adolescence that was relatively flat. Their self-esteem didn't change over the 6 years between the time that there were data available at time 1 and then when they were in high school at time 2. But for some groups, and particularly for the brains most dramatically, these were kids that in elementary school, when they were just about 8, 9, or 10 years old, they had really high self-esteem. In fact, they were the ones with the highest self-esteem of anyone. But by the time they got to adolescence, and many of them remember, these were kids in adolescence who were now the brains. They were known for being the high academic achieving ones. Their self-esteem plummeted more dramatically than anyone else. Here's some similar information when looking at social anxiety. You can see that young kids, at young ages to old ages, the majority of kids, their social anxiety went down over that 6-year period. But the brains, when they're in elementary school, these kids had the lowest levels of social anxiety compared to anyone. And they were the only ones to show increases in social anxiety over that 6-year period from childhood to adolescence. Similarly, they also showed dramatic increases in their level of loneliness over the same period of time. Overall, the results suggested that there's something about being intelligent that is strongly rewarded when kids are young, probably because it's doing exactly what it is that adults want kids to do. But if those kids don't learn how to pretend that they're not trying so hard and now adopting the new peer values, they are penalized. And our data suggested that they show increases in distress and clinical symptoms as a result. So, what's the application here for adults? Of course, it's the case that we're expected to be intelligent. It's okay when we're adults. And it's okay to show that you're trying hard too. But no one likes a geek. It's still the case that you're supposed to be a little bit sociable as well. And perhaps importantly, you're supposed to show that you're developing a way of fitting with what's the norm in your environment. So in adolescence, what's normative is to show that you're doing the opposite of what adults want you to do, at least if you're trying to be popular. In adulthood, we might see this in the workplace. Those people who kind of kiss up a little bit too much, they're trying too hard, that deviates from the norm. And we see those people being less popular in the workplace as a result. On the flip side, there are some people who really seem to blow off work. They don't care. They're pretending like, or they're really acting like they are not working hard when everyone around them might be working towards the team. And when you're doing something that deviates from that norm, also, that leads to less popularity among adults. So in other words, it's interesting to figure out whether at the workplace or in your neighborhood or in other situations as adults, are you demonstrating a way of fitting what the norm is, what seems to be appropriate to do, or are you doing something that makes you seem like you don't understand what is expected? And when you deviate from that, even in adulthood, it's something that makes you much less popular. And that's what we can take away from this experience of what we see in the childhood literature regarding the role of intelligence and popularity. Thanks.